So today we have verses 23, 24, 25, and 26 lined up. Let's start with verse number 23. उपद्रेष्टानुमन्तचाः भर्ता भोक्ता महेश्वराः परमात्मेति चाप्युक्तोः देहेऽस्मिन् पुरुषः पराः. So the verse continues with the explanation of the difference between the God and the Jivatma. And it translates to the Supreme Purush in this body is also called the witness, the permitter, the supporter, the enjoyer, the great Lord, and also the Supreme Self. So let's take this up word by word. Updrishta is a witness. Anumanta, one who gives the anumati or the permitter. Cha and Bharta is one that supports. Bhokta is the enjoyer. Maheshwara is the great Lord. Paramatma is the Supreme Self. And means God here. The rest are all attributes which are being now, they are talking about the spirit in us, in the individual Jivatma. Okay. So Paramatma refers to the Supreme Self. Iti thus, cha and api also. Ukta is called Dehe in this body. Asmin, sorry, so Dehe was in body. Asmin is this. Purusha is that Supreme. Paraha is the Supreme Being. Okay. So the verse translates to the Supreme Purush in this body, right, is also called the witness, the permitter, the supporter, the enjoyer, the great Lord, and also the Supreme Self, God Himself. So let's chant it together. Updreshtanumantachaha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyuktoh Dehesmin Purusha Paraha. So this verse is explaining how that pure consciousness, that unconditioned Purush, that absolute being, God, exists in the conditioned Jivatma, conditioned individual, each one of us. So the Kshetragya or the knower of the field is that pure consciousness which is conditioned by desires and vasanas. Or the Purush or the spirit or the God is by itself unconditioned because of Prakriti. The Purush is separate. But in that individual being, in us, in individual beings, the Purush manifests as conditioned by matter. And the conditioning is typically the vasanas, which is again part of the matter. So now, see, a Jivatma. So all of us, all the billions of people, I'm talking, restricting myself to human beings at this point, because once we understand it to the human beings, then we can move to the other realms, to the animal and to the plant kingdoms. And it is more important to understand with respect to the human beings, because it is the human beings who have a choice. And, you know, we are not programmed. We all do different activities and different actions. So we will restrict now to the human being for this verse. So see, now we have billions of people, mankind in on earth. Different people do different activities. So an individual Jivatma can perform both destructive, harmful actions and vicious actions or beneficial ones. So the roles of Brahman or God in us or in the Jivatma are now presented in this verse in the ascending order of superiority of the action being committed by the individual Jivatma. What this means is that Brahman is enabling us, like we were discussing in the during the recap. So Brahman enables all of us. So whether you are committing a murder or you are helping mankind or doing, relief management work, God is enabling all of us. The adjectives or the roles that are described in this verse are in the order of superiority of the action being done. And let's take them up. Then I think it'll become clearer. So the first one that comes before us is Updrishta or a witness. This is typically God is a witness for any action. And here we are talking about basically a heinous crime, any vicious action. And the vicious action can be from a petty crime to, a serial murder or a heinous murder, anything. Naturally, Brahman, God is enabling the individual. But Brahman is not responsible for the act of the individual, like the fuel in the vehicle, electricity in the electrical appliance. So if a car meets with an accident, you will never blame the petrol in the car. That, okay, the petrol was accidental fuel. I should have got it filled from a different petrol pump. You don't say that. You say it was rash driving, which was responsible, or the person was driving on the wrong side of the road, or skipped a red light, or was speeding, so met with an accident. So just as in the rash driving case, we do not blame the petrol. Or if in an electrical appliance, I go and put my hand in a heater, in a toaster, and say it got burned. See, I mean, how stupid of the electricity to burn me. No, it's not that. Firstly, the toaster is going to heat it, and it is your stupidity which is making you burn your hand. You should be wise enough to understand and unplug the appliance first. So what happens? The God within us, when we are doing a heinous crime, remains a silent witness, does not, just objective, does not do anything. And the next adjective will explain how this is working. The next adjective is Anumanta or permitter. So see, when we are doing a vicious act, our conscience, which is our direct connection to Paramatman, pricks us. Anyone doing a crime, so even if you are stealing, picking up or stealing, even let's say a 10 rupee note from somewhere, your conscience tells you this is not the correct thing. Okay. Similarly, I mean, of course, in case of a murder and other heinous crimes, your conscience pricks you. And it is up to us to listen to it or not listen to it. And what happens is if we keep on not listening to it, it stops, the voice becomes feebler and feebler, and then we don't hear it. We become so thickened, hardened, that we don't stop listening to a conscience. So that was the previous category of action, where we continue on our vicious and wicked ways. Now, when the conscience start pricking us and we are listening to it, actually, when we are not hardened, our mind starts getting agitated. And this always makes us lose our productivity, because now we are listening to a conscience. The mind is telling us that we should not be doing it. The activity that we are going ahead with, we should not be doing it. So our conscience is acting as a deterrent. We fight our conscience to do the wrong act. So we lose our productivity. When we are doing a wrong act, because we are fighting, firstly, we are doing the action, and secondly, we are fighting our conscience. But when we are doing the correct action, Our conscience is not bothering us, because that principle within us is not really troubling us. And we are able to do our action freely without inward turmoil. So it is as if God within us is acting as the permitter of the action, or God is sanctioning and encouraging our action. Which brings us to the third adjective, which is Bharta, or the supporter. So while acting now, when we start also dropping our ego in the action or the doership, God becomes the supporter. God appears to be supporting all our actions, or each Jivatma's actions. The fourth adjective that we are using is Bhokta, enjoyer. So as we proceed on the spiritual path, not only are our selfless goals met. So Bharta was referring to the selfless acts where we drop the ego. So not only our goals are met, but we start enjoying, relishing what we are doing. Life is no longer a chore. We look forward to waking up and starting our day's activities. So the best example that I find is that, see, we all cook, and we could be cooking for ourselves, and okay, but it is never the same as when you cook for someone else, and when you serve and you enjoy the other person enjoying the food that has been cooked by you, right? So you derive pleasure, even if you may not be eating the same dish, or you may, for whatever reason, you derive a lot of pleasure from the other person enjoying the dish that you have served. Typical example, mother derives a lot of pleasure uh, from her child savoring what she has cooked. So God, through us, through the Jivatma, appears to be the enjoyer of the actions. Then we come to Maheshwar, great Lord. So as we proceed further and further on our spiritual path and get closer and closer to God, we start acquiring the characteristics of God and the Jivatma. We ourselves become a great force, and we realize what potential we have within us. And then we look around us and we take the entire environment with us. So we take care of all things that we are around us, or we become the Lord, the caretaker. The Lord also takes care of all its beings. So everything around us. So we become the Lord of what all we behold. Paramatma is the supreme self, as I mentioned, God. So, this is the stage, the final stage of complete identification with Brahman, when the Jivatma merges with Brahman and becomes Brahman. Now, interestingly, all these adjectives, you may recollect, were used in chapter 7 and chapter 8 when we were talking about Brahman. The same things are now being brought down to our level. How they appear in the Jivatma, into that conditioned Brahman. So when we read it, it's easy to understand it in God. But when we translate it into ourselves, and or how it's manifested in us, it takes time for things to settle down. Right? So that's why we had a lot of recap questions today while recapping the verses. So this was verse number 23. We proceed to verse number 24. I will chant. यः एवं वेति पुरुषं प्रकृतिं च गुणे सह सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि न स भूयोऽभिजायते. He who knows Purusha, spirit, and Prakriti, matter, together with gunas, qualities, though living in whatever way, he is not born again. Let's take this up word by word. Yaha is who or he. Evam, thus, Veti knows, Purusha spirit, Prakritim is matter, Cha and Gune with the gunas or the qualities, Saha with Sarvatha in all ways, manners, or in all ways or manners. Vartman is in the condition, in the current state, living. Api even, na not, saha he, bhuya again, abhijayate. Abhijayate is born. So, one who knows Purush and Prakriti together with gunas, though living in whatever way, in whatever state, he is not born again. Let's chant together. यः एवं वेति पुरुषं प्रकृतिं च गुणे सः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि न स भूयोऽभिजायते. So, verse is simple. It's saying that the seeker who knows Purush, spirit, Prakriti, matter, along with gunas, qualities, and the relationships between Purush, Prakriti, gunas. So this relationship they know that Supreme Being. So we'll revise. Purush is that God by itself, has no expression, and is immutable, is changeable. Prakriti, matter, is inert and cannot, without the help of Purush, it is inert. It is only when the Purush enlivens the Prakriti that this scintillating creation takes place. And this manifests as gunas of Prakriti. So, gunas are in the realm of matter. So, once this bit is understood, that it is God enabling Prakriti, which is manifesting in the form of gunas. What have I understood? I have understood as a Jivatma, I have understood that I am that God. I am that consciousness trapped in this Prakriti, and I am prompted by my gunas, by my vasanas. And therefore, I am acting as I am. So a person who's power hungry will be seeking power. A businessman would be looking for profits, so on and so forth. Now, once I know this, what the verse is saying, that once I know this relationship, that I am that God living in this body or is trapped in this matter, acting according to my nature, vasana, I can be living in whatever manner I currently am, but I will not be born again. So I could be a yogi, I could be a bhogi. I mean, so I could be a businessman, a politician, an economist. But what has happened once I have this understanding is that I have stopped identifying my with the limited ego or with the limited conditioned uh, me. I have started identifying with that God. So I have stopped identifying with my limitations. So I will not be born again. I will escape the realm of birth and death. That means even in this world, even in this current life, I will not seek the same experiences again and again, because I have aligned with that Paramatman. It's like once I wake up from the dream, I understand that the entire dream world that I was experiencing never really existed. So the waker, once he wakes up, realizes he was dreaming. It was an activity which was like, it was a dream. It was an illusion. So once he wakes up, he is not the dreamer. So the knowledge, this knowledge of understanding the spirit, matter, and the relationship of the gunas and how they relate to the gunas. This knowledge, understanding, results in experiencing, and all these three, the knowledge, understanding, and the experience, transform us humans into a divine being. We no longer feel the limited entity, that we are a limited entity. We become larger. We have a larger existence. So the person may be moving just around us. You know, he may be my neighbor, my boss, my spouse, a beggar on the road, someone crossing the street. You can't really make out. So he exists in the world like other beings, but he is not the same. He has realized, he's understood, he's woken up from the dream. So that experience of God is param or supreme, beyond which nothing else needs to be known. It is eternal, immutable, timeless, and therefore permanent. And that God, the wise one, knows is me, myself. And I become, you know, it's a final merger that we talked about in the previous verse, the Paramam, right? And this knowledge provides us with supreme bliss. The final merger leads us to immortality because we become one with God and we have a realm of time. We become changeless. So it frees us from the cycle of birth and death, or from the change that is a phenomenon of this world. It is a lack of knowledge. On the other hand, avidya, ignorance, or existence of vasanas. So we are not working on our vasanas, to removing our vasanas. That results in the cycle of birth and death. And we have spent many verses and chapters trying to understand this. Knowledge of self leads to sublimation of vasanas because we pitch our goal, the highest goal, which is God. That is what is our goal now. And birth we takes place only because whatever vasanas are remaining, they need to be exhausted and sublimated. And once there are no vasanas remaining, no desires remaining, we are one with God. So that was verse number 24. Now we move on to 25, 26. We will chant them separately, but we will take up the discussion together because it's a one flow of thought. ध्यानेनात्मनि पश्यन्ति केचिदात्मानमात्मना अन्यसाङ्ख्येन योगेन कर्मयोगेन चापरेः. So this verse translates to verse number 25. Some by meditation perceive the self in self by the self. Others by Sankhya Yoga or yoga of knowledge, and others by Karma Yoga, yoga of action. So let's take this up word by word. Dhyanin is by meditation. Atmani, in self. Pashyanti is perceive or behold. Kechit, some. Atmanam is self, that self, God. Atmana, by self, by individual self. Anya, others. Sankhya Yogain is the Sankhya Yoga or the yoga of knowledge. Karma Yogain by the Karma Yoga or the yoga of action. Cha and Apare is others. So then we come to verse number 26. I will chant just now. अन्यत्वेवमजानन्तः श्रुत्वा नेभ्य उपासते तेऽपि चाते तरन्त एव मृत्युं श्रुतिपरायणाः. So 26th verse translates to others not knowing thus worship the Supreme, having heard from others, and they too cross over death, taking refuge in whatever they have heard. So word by word, anya, others, tu yet, evam, thus, ajanantah, not knowing. Janna is to know, ajanan becomes not knowing. Shrutva is having heard. Shruti is hearing. So Shrutva becomes having heard. Anebhya from others, from Anya is others, Anebhya becomes from others. Upasate, worship. Te is they. Api also. Cha and Atitaranti, cross over or cross beyond. Ev, even Mrityum, death. Shruti Parayana is taking refuge in that supreme self, in that supreme that they have heard. So the verse translates to others not knowing thus, so by themselves not knowing, so others not knowing thus, worship the supreme, having heard from others, and they too cross over death, taking refuge in what they have heard. So let's chant both the verses together. ध्यानेनात्मनि पश्यन्ति केचिदात्मानमात्मना अन्यसाङ्ख्येन योगेन कर्मयोगेन चापरे अन्यत्वेवम् अजानन्तः श्रुत्वा नेभय उपासते तेऽपि चाते तरन्त एव मृत्युं परायणाः. So now, see, in chapter 12, which was the Bhakti Yoga chapter, we had covered different parts of reaching God. You know, worshipping a form, not worshipping a form, that was one aspect. Then we had talked about, the path of action and the path of knowledge. So all that was covered. Now, the choice of paths, why is it presented before us? So that we can find the best fit for us, right? So like when you go in for custom tailoring, for example, you expect the dress to fit you much better than what you buy off the rack garments at a store, let's say. So the tailor goes through the measuring us in detail so that the shoulder is a perfect fit and so on and so forth. And the result is that we expect the garment to fit us much better than a ready-made garment. Now, that is precisely why when we were doing the initial chapters of, chapter 3, chapter 4, all those chapters up till chapter 6, I'd been insisting that we need to do an analysis of ourselves, right? To see what is our pravriti, what is our nature. So our scriptures are giving us, presenting before us different paths, and we choose the path which is best fit for us as per our vasanas, our natures, and our gunas. As humans, we all have different natures, and the texture of our vasanas is different. Now, we must understand this, that our inner nature is a combination of the various gunas, the, sattva, rajas, and tamas. All of us have it in different proportions and with relation to the different fields of activity. Now, and also, we are a product of our past. That means the vasanas in us are actually a carryover from our past. Now, when we look at ourselves, broadly covering the analysis part, will not be able to go into detail, but broadly, when we look at all of us, three broad categories emerge. So they are the people, they are the extremely rational, logical, dry people, if I may say so. Then the second are the energetic ones who are always rushing into action and always, what next? What should I do next? And then we have the emotional variety who are always working on emotions and, compassion, love, fear. It's always emotional. So the three categories actually translate to the head ruling the heart, balanced head and heart. This is where the energetic people are because they're always then moving out into the world, or the heart ruling the head, which is the emotional variety. Now, these two verses, that 25 and 26, are actually presenting three paths addressing these three kinds of individuals. So the three paths that are presented before us is the Sankhya Yoga, the path of knowledge for a rational, logical human being, the Karma Yoga, or the path of action for a very rajasic and energetic person, Bhakti Yoga, or path of devotion for the emotional one, which is actually coming out in the second verse. That means verse number 26. Now, these three paths are relating to self-realization at different levels. How? Sankhya Yoga means Sankhya means actually reflecting in a sequential, logical way to arrive at a conclusion. So Sankhya Yoga means the path of knowledge, or Jnana Yoga. So Jnana Yoga and Sankhya Yoga to that extent are synonymous. Karma Yoga is a path of action. So all actions are dedicated to a higher goal and done in the spirit of service and sacrifice. So Sankhya Yoga, you may recollect, was chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. The name of the chapter is Sankhya Yoga. Karma Yoga was chapter 3, path of action. Then we come to Bhakti Yoga, path of devotion. Now, this is where the seekers follow the path of belief by imbibing the values instructed by their teacher, spiritual teacher. So these are the three paths that come before us. Now, all these three paths are actually taking us to the level of meditation. Through these three paths, we reach that state where we can sit down for meditation. So, practices of yoga at the physical, mental, and intellectual levels prepare us to sit down in dhyan or meditation on God. Now, we will revise again. What is yoga? The root is yuj, which means unite. Unite to what? Unite to God, our supreme self, our normal state, which is that of supreme bliss. But what are we seeking when we are in a jiva, as a jivatma? We are seeking that happiness and bliss. But that is our natural state. Yet we don't feel that, we are eternally blissful and happy. Why? This is because of the vasanas which cover us. They corrupt us. So we know, or we have that intuitive feeling that we are that supreme bliss. That is our natural state. So we will continue to look for it till we find it. And the efforts that we put in at the level of the body, mind, and intellectual levels to merge with God constitute yoga, and not the physical exercises that one does every morning. The asanas, they are at the physical level. They are not, this yoga is not the same as that physical yoga. It's not a pranayama. So yoga here means the technique, the discipline to unite, to move on the path to unite with God. So practices of the Karma Yoga, path of action at the level of the body, Bhakti Yoga at the path of devotion at the mind level, Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge at the intellect, helps us in our own purification. Right? So now through these three disciplines, what are we essentially doing? We are reducing our desires, moving towards away from the world into ourselves, into our source, towards that Paramatman within us, and we gain peace of mind, equanimity, and our intellect is freed up so that we can focus on the supreme self. It is only a controlled mind that can rest on that Paramatman. Actually, not only God, anything. It can concentrate. It's only a free mind that can concentrate on anything. Then the next is, why is yoga important? It is important because whatever we see around us is relative. We stay in a relative world. So all the truths and all the facts that we look around, that we observe around us, that we experience are relative. The time is relative, weather is relative, gravity is relative. So whenever we arrive at a conclusion, so even if we are doing a scientific research and we come to a conclusion, it is in the relative realm. So our intellect is working on comparison. So that same plane example, that when the plane is taking off, you can feel the tremendous speed at which the plane is moving. But once it is taken off and you have nothing to compare the speed with, so you don't even realize you're moving at what great velocity. So our intellect works on comparison. And the supreme bliss, unfortunately, is absolute. So we cannot comprehend it. There is no yardstick under which we can measure it. Therefore, we are not able to comprehend it. Now, yoga is the only thing which aims at transcending the relative world or the relative sciences or the relative knowledge and moving towards the absolute. We have to go beyond what can be proven, what can be experienced, what can be expressed. So it is something which cannot be explained. So yoga or union creates the right environment in ourselves so that the truth can reveal itself. So see, God reveals itself. We don't have to go and grab it because God is actually within each one of us. We have to reach there. And then once we reach there, it reveals itself. We don't have the wherewithal to actually perceive God. So truth transcends the relative plane. It's beyond our intellect. It is that ekam, one homogeneous reality in which everything actually exists. So we have to get beyond our intellect, which can only perceive or comprehend relatively. Relatively, yes. And we have to engage in these practices of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, which tell us the parameters that help in uniting with God. Essentially, they're telling us how to conduct ourselves and parameters within which we should work. And see, whatever technology you may be using these days, so maybe it's internet, television, and mobile phones, they're not taking us towards true happiness. They might be providing us with entertainment, wasting of our time, relative learning, yes. I mean, people who do that. So, but they are not telling us where Brahman, where that God or that power, that source, Purush exists. It is qualities like compassion, lovingness, truthfulness, etc., which create the right environment for the truth to descend on us. And interestingly, whatever we have covered is all common science, it's all common sense. But this, I mean, maybe that's one reason, because it's so common and it's so simple that we miss them. So these practices of the Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga lead to our own purification. And we had covered all this in detail in the previous chapters. And because of which the mind is now available for meditation on God. The paths, of course, is as per our nature, we pick up the path. And once again, I would like to lay stress that we must take out some time to evaluate what kind of a person I am and then chalk out a path so that I'm able to proceed more efficiently on my spiritual path. So we must take out time to measure our nature just as the tailor measures us for a better fit of a garment at the physical level. Now, progressing on the path, the seeker reaches that original state of absolute peace and bliss, and then one is disentangled or escapes the cycle of birth and death, and the seeker is liberated. So with that, we conclude today's session.